Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. My name is Philipe Moriel. I'm a new assistant professor here at the Ranch Cattle Research and Education Center. In this webinar this morning, I'm going to share with you the two studies that we are about to start, and both of them were funded by the Florida Cattlemen's Association. And the other two studies that we're going to share with you are the preconditioning studies that we just recently completed. Okay. So the first study that we're going to start next month is regarding year-round supplementation. And I would like to take the opportunity and thank the Cattlemen's Association for funding that study. So what we're going to do, usually here at ONA and in most part of Florida, producers provide supplementation only during the winter time. So what we're going to do, we're going to stretch that supplementation throughout the entire year. We're not going to increase the amount of supplementation, we're just spreading that same annual amount throughout the entire year. And the idea is that we will be able to increase body weight gain and body conditioning score of those cows during the summer and early fall. So those cows, they will have in a better body conditioning score. And most of you are aware of that body conditioning score is the most important factor that influences the pregnancy rates and the timing that those pregnancies will occur. So our hypothesis is that we're going to increase their nutritional status to the point that we increase body conditioning score at calving and increase their pregnancy rates. We're also going to improve their nutritional status throughout the entire gestation. So that means that in theory, we're going to improve the development of those calves during gestation, and that can impact their performance later in life. So we expect that the calf performance will be increased after birth, and cow pregnancy rates will also be increased by that, and the increment will be better than the extra cost of labor with this study. Okay. Now, the second one that we're going to do, we're going to focus only during late gestation. There are several indications in other parts of the United States using Angus cows in the Midwest of the United States that when you provide protein supplementation during the last 90 days before calving, you increase the performance of those calves after birth, increasing carcass quality of steers and also increasing pregnancy rates of those heifers. So what we're going to do, we're going to pretty much repeat that study here in Florida. We don't know if we're going to have the same responses as they are reporting in other parts of the United States. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a treatment that there's no supplementation. This is our control. And a second treatment where we're going to provide 1 pound of a protein supplement during the last 90 days before they calve. And then we added a third treatment that we wanted to see, can we still achieve the same positive outcomes of supplementing those cows during late gestation, but concentrating the entire supplementation in a very strategic time. So what we're going to do, instead of providing 1 pound of that supplement for 90 days, we provide 3 pounds of the same supplement for 30 days, right after calving, right after weaning, I'm sorry, when their requirements are the lowest. I'm sorry about that. So we expect that we will be able to put more weight and more body conditioning score on those cows using the same amount of supplementation. And we're cutting labor by 2/3 in this case. Okay. If you have any questions about that study, I will be glad to answer after this presentation. And you will also see my email. You can send me an email regarding any questions you would like to have answered. Now, regarding the preconditioning studies, why did we focus on that? That's because bovine respiratory disease is still one of the biggest issues in the United States. Almost $1 billion losses every year due to bovine respiratory disease, and it's the main cause of mortality and morbidity in the feedlot still. So there are several nutritional management practices that we can do before and after weaning to help with that. We're not going to cover all of them this morning. We're just going to focus on the preconditioning. Okay, so for those of you that do not know what preconditioning means, is a calf management practice that you keep your calf for at least 45 days after weaning. You keep that calf at the range where that calf was born. During that time, you can vaccinate the calves, castrate. You're giving time for that calf to deal with the stress of weaning. Plus, you're also teaching that calf to eat on a feed bunk. So those calves associate people with feed, they associate feed bunk with feed. So when you send them to the feedlot, they know what to do. They're going to have greater intake during the first few weeks, and that's going to be extremely helpful with performance, stress, and health. Okay? Now, we thought that we could decrease the frequency of supplementation during preconditioning to reduce costs. Okay, so instead of providing supplementation daily, let's say 3 pounds of concentrate daily, that's 21 pounds over a week, we thought that maybe if we provide 3 times weekly, 7 pounds on Monday, 7 on Wednesday, and 7 on Friday, it's the same weekly amount, we could decrease labor, be more convenient for everybody, and still achieve the same outcomes. But what we found out is that when you reduce the frequency of supplementation, you cause a lot of fluctuation on forage intake and also nutrient intake, and that seems to hurt their performance. What we found out was that over a 42-day period of preconditioning, those calves that were fed 3 times weekly, the concentrate, they had a lower average daily gain, about 0.6 pounds lower than calves that were supplemented daily. So when you look at the costs, obviously the labor costs were half, but the reduction that we had on performance was much greater than what we saved on labor. So when you look at total return per calves, if we decrease the frequency of supplementation, they were losing about $30 per calf. Okay, even though you're saving on labor. And a lot of that was because those calves that were supplemented 3 times weekly, they were more stressed. So they had greater stress levels. We measured that by measuring cortisol in the blood. And they also had lower percentage of calves that responded to the vaccination. 21% of those calves never produced any amount of antibody after we vaccinated. And the ones that did produce the antibody, they had lower production. Okay. So since we published that study, we decided to focus on other strategies that could allow us to decrease the frequency of supplementation without seeing those negative effects. So for the rest of the presentation, I would like to introduce Glazy Silva. She is completing her master's here at the Ranch Cattle Research and Education Center with us. She will be done in about 2 months. And the 2 studies that she's going to share with us are the studies that she used for her master's program. Okay, she's not going to cover all the data that we have. We're going to save that for her defense, but she's going to be very objective and show the main findings that we have so far. Okay, so give me 1 second.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Yeah, okay, so thank you, Dr. Moriel, and good morning, everyone, for being here today. As he mentioned, I'm going to talk about 2 studies that we conducted to actually try to find strategies to allow producers to precondition their animals with a reduced costs and without causing negative effects on growth and immune response of preconditioning beef calves. So the first study that I'm going to talk today had as the objective to evaluate growth performance and measurements of innate and humoral immunity of beef calves when they were offered different frequencies of supplementation during a 42 days preconditioning period. This study was conducted at the Mountain Research Station in Waynesville, North Carolina from May to July 2016. In this study, we used 42 Angus steers, and they were stratified and distributed to one of the 14 dry lot pens that we used. We had 3 steers per pen. From the Day 0 to 42, which was the preconditioning period, the animals, they had free choice of ground tall fescue hay, and they received the supplementation at 1% of the body weight. The supplementation consisted of a 50-50 mixture of soybean hulls and corn gluten feed. 14 days before the start of the experiment, we weaned the calves and we allowed them to graze, and they received supplementation at 0.5% of the body weight for adaptation to the concentrate diet. And on day 0, when we were starting the experiment, we vaccinated all the animals against the mailing pathogens that causes BRD, and we divided them to one of the 3 treatments we tested. The first treatment consisted of supplementation that was offered daily from day 0 until the end of the preconditioning period. A second treatment consisted of supplementation that was offered 3 times weekly during the entire study, which consisted of supplementation offered on Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. And the third treatment that consisted of supplementation that was offered daily from day 0 until day 14, and from day 15, when we give the animals the booster of the vaccination, we changed the frequency of supplementation. From now, instead of feeding them daily, we supplemented those calves only 3 times weekly until the end of the study. When we see the results from the experiment, it's interesting to see about the growth performances that mainly we didn't find statistical significance for body weight and the average daily gain. It's nice to see that from day 0 to 50 for average daily gain, numerically, the calves that were supplemented 3 times weekly during the entire study, they had lower average daily gain when compared to the other 2 treatments. Also, in the end of the experiment, from day 0 to 42, they also had lower average daily gain when compared to the other 2 treatments. And the final body weight on day 42 was also lower. And it's also important to see here that the steers that had the frequency of supplementation gradually reduced, they responded in as the same manner as the steers that were supplemented daily during the entire study. When we moved to innate immunity, we analyzed plasma cortisol, which can be used as an indicator of stress, and also plasma aptoglobin, which can be used as an indicator of inflammation in the animals. We can see that the calves that were supplemented 3 times weekly during the entire study, they had greater plasma cortisol and aptoglobin. So it means they were more stressed and they had higher inflammation when compared with the other 2 treatments. Also, the steers that were that had the frequency of supplementation gradually reduced, they had the same values than the steers that were supplemented daily during the entire study. So we could decrease stress and inflammation when we gradually reduce the frequency of supplementation. When we moved to humoral immunity, we analyzed two main pathogens that causes BRD, which is parainfluenza 3 and infectious bovine rhinotracheitis virus. Those 2 pathogens are really important and they can cause BRD in the cattle. And we analyzed serum titers, which is the production of antibodies, and we analyzed seroconversion, which can express the percentage of animals responding to vaccination. So we could see that for parainfluenza 3 virus, the serum conversion on day 15 for the steers that were supplemented only 3 times weekly during the entire study, they had lower serum conversion. But in the end of the experiment, all the animals, they had the same serum conversion. So it's important because this data shows that the steers that were supplemented only 3 times weekly during the entire preconditioning period, they took longer to respond to the vaccination, so they could be really affected by this pathogen. And also we can see that the steers that were supplemented, that were gradually reduced, that we gradually reduced the frequency of supplementation, they responded as good as the steers that were supplemented daily during the entire study. For the infectious bovine rhinotracheitis, we can see that steers supplemented 3 times weekly during the entire study, they had lower serum titers, so they produced less antibodies in the end of the study when compared to the other 2 treatments. And again, the treatment that we reduced gradually the frequency of supplementation, they responded really well to vaccination as the same way as the steers that were fed supplementation daily during the entire study. So with that, we can conclude in this first study that when we reduce gradually the frequency of supplementation, we did not impact negatively growth, so it is pretty good. And we also reduced inflammation and stress in those calves. And also we got really good results in terms of vaccine response because they could respond really well to vaccination when compared to steers that were supplemented only 3 times weekly during the entire study. The second strategy that was thought to overcome the negative effects of the reduction in the frequency of supplementation was to avoid, if you can see this first graph, was to avoid the high stress caused by a reduced frequency of supplementation on the day of the vaccine, which we could see stress can decrease vaccine response because it impacts negatively the antibody production. So if we anticipate the time of vaccination, in our study, we anticipated 14 days before weaning, we could avoid this stress caused by a reduction in the frequency of supplementation. We would also allow animals to produce antibodies until weaning, and then after weaning, we could decrease the frequency of supplementation, but without causing the negative effects in growth and immune response. With that, we planned the second study where we evaluated 2 times of vaccination, which was pre and post weaning, and also we evaluated 2 frequencies of supplementation post weaning, or daily or 3 times weekly during 42 days preconditioning period. We also evaluated the same parameters from the study 1. In our experimental design, as I said, we had 2 times of vaccination, which consisted of vaccinations before weaning, where the calves received supplementation 14 days before weaning, and the second round on the weaning day. And the second time of the vaccination was post-weaning for a second group of animals, where they received the vaccinations 7 days after weaning, and then 21 days after weaning, they received the booster. From day 0 to 7, the calves, they were, from day 0 to 7, calves were supplemented daily for adaptation at 0.5% of the body weight. The same diet used in the second experiment was the diet provided in the first one, and they received supplementation daily for adaptation. However, from day 7, we separated the groups, and we fed a group of calves receiving supplementation daily, and another group receiving supplementation 3 times weekly. And in the end, we had the 4 combinations or 4 treatments where we could evaluate the time of vaccination and the effects of frequency of supplementation. When we see the results for hay dry matter intake, we actually, for all the results, we wanted to see the effects of the time of vaccination and the frequency of supplementation. And for hay intake, first I'm going to show you the effects of time of vaccination, what it does in hay dry matter intake. But first I would like to apologize, the data is in kilo, it's not in pounds. But the main point is just I want to show you what vaccination and the frequency of supplementation can do to hay dry matter intake. So here we can see that in the week of the study, in the week 2, we had a reduction in hay intake from the calves that were vaccinated post-weaning. It was exactly on the week they were vaccinated. So many studies shows that when we vaccinate animals, we can induce an inflammation, and this inflammation reduces intake. So it was exactly what we found here. And for the following weeks, we didn't find difference among between treatments, because the animals already were not facing inflammation anymore, so they could have the similar intake over the entire experiment. When we see now the effects of reduction in the frequency of supplementation on hay intake, we can see that the orange lines means the calf represents the calves that were supplemented daily. So we can see there is no big variation in hay intake because they are eating concentrate daily, the same amount daily during the entire study. So it will not impact negatively intake will not cause a variation. However, when we see the calves that were supplemented 3 times weekly, which is represented by the blue lines, we can see a huge variation in intake among the weeks of the experiment. We can see the dashed line means that the calves were not supplemented, so we can see that is a huge increase in hydrogen matter intake compared to the days those calves were supplemented, which is represented by the solid line. These results are really similar to the results we previously reported in hay intake. When we see the growth performance of those calves, we wanted to report, to show you the average daily gain. And again, we wanted to show you the effects of time of vaccination and supplementation frequency. And also the average daily gain data is divided to see the effects of vaccination in each treatment for the average daily gain. So you can see from the -14 to 0, when the pre-calves were vaccinated before weaning, they had lower average daily gain. As I said before, intake can be depressed because of vaccination, and also, consequently, it can impact average daily gain. However, when we see the average daily gain from the 0 to 42, we did not find a difference. But when we see from the 7 to 21, we can see that post-calves, they had a lower average daily gain because it was exactly when they were vaccinated, so it's expected. And from day 21 to 42, we can see that the post-calves, they had a greater average daily gain compared to pre-weaning, probably because of compensatory growth, because they produced less in the period before. When we see now the effects of supplementation frequency in those calves, we can see, as reported before, that when calves are supplemented only 3 times weekly, they can reduce their average daily gain. We can find a negative impact in average daily gain for those calves. However, it was a tendency that was found in the study. And when we see from the entire period, from day -14 to 42, we can see an effect of vaccination and frequency of supplementation. And we can see that average daily gain from the calves that were vaccinated 14 days before weaning, and that after weaning, they received supplementation only 3 times weekly, they had the least average daily gain when compared to the other treatments, while the other treatments did not differ among them. When we move to innate immunity and for data from plasma cortisol and aptoglobin, we can see that the calves that were vaccinated before weaning, they were much more stressed. Consequently, they had more inflammation when compared to the calves that were vaccinated post-weaning. These results can explain a further antibody production. Also, when we see the effects of supplementation frequency on overall plasma cortisol, again, we can see that steers that are supplemented only 3 times weekly, they have greater plasma concentrations of cortisol. It was already reported in our previous studies. When we move to humoral immunity, we can see that the serum titers for parainfluenza 3 virus was also lower for the calves that were supplemented only 3 times weekly, and also for the calves that were vaccinated before weaning. So those results can be explained by the greater plasma cortisol, which can block the communication between innate and humoral immunity, so it decreases antibody production, suppress the immune system. Also, in this study, we analyzed bovine viral diarrhea virus type 1B, which is another pathogen really important to cause BRD in cattle. And we can see that when we reduced the frequency of supplementation, again, the calves had lower serum titers production when compared to calves that were supplemented daily. With that, we can conclude from that study that when we vaccinate calves 14 days before weaning and then after weaning, we reduce the frequency of supplementation, we're gonna have the lowest overall calf performance. And also, when we vaccinate calves after weaning, and then when we provide concentrates daily to day, it's still, according to these studies, is still the best option to avoid negative effects on growth and mainly immune response. To summarize the data presented today, when we gradually reduced the frequency of supplementation, which was in the first study, it was good because there was no negative impacts on growth, but also we alleviated inflammation and we could reduce stress in those calves. Also, the animals, they could respond to vaccination as the same way as the calves that were supplemented daily during the entire study. And the second study, we can see that when we vaccinated calves before 14 days before weaning, they were much more stressed, so they had a lower average daily gain after weaning, and also they responded less to vaccination. And with that, I would like to thank you, and we're gonna be happy to answer any questions you may have.
So we can take any questions from the audience, give time for people in the chat to type their questions. So does anybody have any questions? Or that's it?
I have a question. You probably told that before, but so on the days that the calves did not receive supplementation, does they have like any hay left over on the previous day? Like,
yeah, hay it was provided daily.
Oh, okay.
So the act of feeding is still happening daily. So some days they got concentrated, some days they were not. But you also always have fresh hay every day. So I don't see any questions.
I think the booster is different intervals. One was boosted from 0 and 14, and then the post booster from 14 and 21. No. So,
Yeah, the interval is always the same. Okay, it's always 14 days between the first and the second one. We just changed the time to that. So we provided 14 days before weaning and the booster at weaning. The other treatment, it's day 7 and 21. So the interval was always the same. We didn't change that. It was just the time.
what product was used?
BOVINE Gold, 1 shot.
And that's a 14-day booster?
No, the booster is for the ultraback and BOVINE Gold 5. So they got BOVINE Gold 1 shot on day 0 and ultraback. Day 14 ultraback and BOVINE Gold 5. So
on that vaccine, that's a minimum of 14 days.
Yeah, 2 to 3 weeks the interval that they recommend on that in the label for that. So the question that they had was, why was the post-treatment done 7 days after weaning and not on the same day as weaning? Too much stress. And that's exactly right. We already have other indications that if we do at weaning, we're decreasing the vaccine response. So we did not want to do that to be unfair with that treatment. We want that treatment to have the best antibody response that we could have. And we already have indications that if you delay up to 14 days, you increase that response. So that's why we decided to do it, not on the day at weaning, but just about 7 days later. Okay. So thank you.